Well, good afternoon. And I'm Rob Grimes, the CEO of the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. And today we're going to have sort of an interesting conversation because the conversation these days seems to be about AI. Every conversation I have seems to be about it. And yet, our subject today is you're doing AI all wrong, which if that didn't grab you and get you here, well, nothing will, because we need to figure out what it is we're doing wrong, what we need to consider, and how we get it right, because it obviously is going to be a tool for us going forward. And as part of the conversation today, we have two guests that are going to join me. But before we get started, let me just go over some of the housekeeping items that we need to know of. We are going to be doing some Q&A. The Q&A questions need to be submitted in the Q&A tab, which would be at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to them as we go. There's going to be a Q&A at the end, but if something comes up, we'll go ahead and insert it in here. And if we don't get to everything, we'll certainly try to answer those questions afterwards. This is being recorded, as you heard, and it will be posted shortly after we are done. And you'll be able to share this with your friends and colleagues, and also we will respond to those Q&A pieces. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Adam and to Jay, and they're going to start with introducing themselves, and we're going to figure out why we're doing it all wrong.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Rob. Why don't we start with you, Jay, in this story?
Sure. My name is Jay Spears, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at CEC Entertainment, but you know us as Chuck E. Cheese. I've been in the entertainment business for the last 10 years and technology for the last 30. And just the last couple of years, I've really gotten into the AI space and gotten involved with a number of projects here. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, it's interesting. Another question is who's more excited to be there, the guide, you? Certainly not the fish, but all jokes aside, we are excited to have you. Your experience as an operator is so wildly valuable in these conversations, and I'm hoping that my experience can complement that. So my name's Adam Dumey. I'm with Worldwide Technology, and for the purposes of the conversation, my background is in artificial intelligence in a somewhat different lens. I've led global implementations of artificial intelligence across the hardware and software stack. I've created ecosystem of partners to help customers drive value faster. Now, in my sales role, I'm helping customers along the journey across each of these use cases to the right. And again, I've been doing this for 11 years, and as we have conversations, and Rob teed it up well, there are certain elements of artificial intelligence that are much more complex than they are years
And you
ago.
don't really need us for this conversation at all. But we have an expert in artificial intelligence, and I continue to point out to people that pizza happens to be one of the most complex things that we have in the industry. So no better way to artificially intelligently have this conversation today.
Yeah.
Yep. And so as we think about artificial intelligence, again, the kinds of considerations that were important 11 years ago, they still manifest and matter today. So your data still has to be pristine. Your systems still need to be integrated. You still need the right mechanism to ensure AI is operating within safe boundaries. Your infrastructure grounding needs to be solid and your organization needs to be ready. So the kinds of considerations haven't changed. What has changed are the degrees. And so we wanted to spend some time on that because it sets the right foundation for this conversation. So if we think of a data perspective, 11 years ago when I started in this game, the data was very much oriented around structured data, tables. The idea of unstructured text was just coming into play, and even accessing that data was either keyword or Boolean search. If you think of today, the models have exploded. The kinds of models and the applications and the modalities and therefore the data are much richer. Integration. Back then, there was no scale. So in terms of integrating systems, they were all custom. Nowadays, one of the benefits of 2025 is you have some amazing software providers and hardware providers that have created integration points as soon as you download the software, right? It accelerates the time to value so you don't have to mess with integrating to your SharePoint site or integrating with your code base. From a governance side in 2011, it was the wild, wild west. We didn't have model cards. We didn't have benchmarks, right? We had to develop our own metrics and frameworks to ensure artificial intelligence was working, and that was expensive and costly. And now I think we've over-indexed a little bit on some of those external benchmarks, but they're certainly there and certainly a guiding point that our customers are using with success. And then from an infrastructure perspective, believe it or not, there's a day and time where compute wasn't as widely available as it is today. The number of racks that we leverage at my previous employers for basic artificial intelligence installations would blow your mind as compared to today. You can access that very simply over your mobile phone. And the last piece is from a readiness perspective. In 2011, it was really about experimentation. Failing fast, I believe, was coined during the 2010s. Nowadays, there's an expectation because AI is so readily available, because so many people have unearthed the power of it. There's an expectation from your board down, your customers up, to employ AI into your overall strategy. As you think
There's also an expectation, by the way, that if you're buying an application, and I'm sure that Jay goes through this all the time, that it's actually already embedded.
Yep.
And so as you think about even some of those applications that Rob alluded to, they're built on modular components. And so if you take infrastructure for a second, you can have an infrastructure component. Again, this fundamentally hasn't changed in kinds from 2011, but you would have a compute component and a storage component and a database component. What has changed now is your database can now be a vector database or a graph database. And within each of those spaces, there are vendors which the audience is very familiar with that have staked their claim into adding value in those components. So if you think of just these buckets, if this overwhelms you with the scope of its application, then this slide is gonna make for a very bad Thursday, because this is, I think, an amazing landscape. And I will keep this on for a minute or so, but it's amazing placemat to really decompose this thing we call AI and its many attributes. Right? There's an infrastructure piece. Eventually, there's some algorithms. Eventually, there's some folks that come into the play to help you bring this to life. And so our goal, again, is this is what the market is telling you. Our goal is to whittle that down. Jay has an operator's background. I have an operator's background. Both of us have seen AI across our own journeys, but also that of others. And what we found is, one, AI isn't one thing. But if you leverage and think through the different types of artificial intelligence that likely are being discussed in your teams, everything from machine learning to robotics, there are some common pitfalls. And those pitfalls often cause a delay in either artificial intelligence adoption or just an extreme increase in the cost to get from point A to point B. And that is really the focus
project failure.
Or project failure. Exactly right. Exactly right. And so that's really the focus of today is we don't want to talk about the shiny objects. Jay and I really want to reflect upon those instances and those lessons learned that we've seen, or to Jay's point, we've encountered to showcase artificial intelligence.
And I'm going to guess, by the way, from what you have on the screen right now, is that if we ask, a dozen people, what AI is, you get a dozen different answers, but most people will probably say, the third and the fourth, and may not consider some of the other, maybe they say number two, but they may not consider all of them as components.
Yeah, we did another talk about a month ago, and we asked a similar question. As you think about artificial intelligence, what's the top one or two words that come to mind? And 84% of the audience said ChatGPT. So even to your point, Robin, that's a great distinction. The application of AI is secondary to still the engine behind it, which is, I think, a sign of immaturity in the market. And so, again, as we think about the challenges, we'll go through the top 5 that we've identified, and I could tee off the first one, which is this idea of prioritization. So the exuberance of AI has really forced a lot of excitement. And that excitement often results and manifests in direction to apply AI in a certain way. Now, that may be the fastest way since you have top-down pressure. It doesn't mean it has the best ROI. It doesn't mean your systems are ready for it. It just means this is the pressure that you've received. And what we found is those that jump in the pool too quickly definitely don't succeed. Potentially, they doggy paddle, and potentially they drown. And so this is an area of taking a step back, being a bit methodical in your course before proceeding.
Well, I suspect we're going to get a number coming to the right. So if you don't mind, maybe we can just drill down on this one a little bit before we go to the next one. So, in your introduction, which I thought was very good, just one comment about it is that chart that you had that talked about the landscape of AI.
Mhm.
You know, I show charts all the time that talk about the landscape of applications in restaurants, food service, hotel, retail, which are also both of your worlds actually. And you try to layer that on, and I'm just sort of curious if you don't mind, if you might just comment about if you take one landscape, which is the AI landscape, and then you layer it on with our industry landscape, you know, there isn't really a joint chart.
Mhm.
So how does one actually navigate that? You know, because you're really putting a lot out there.
Yeah, I can take a stab, Jay, and that I love of your
Yeah.
perspective. As I think about the utility of AI, it's always to fulfill a purpose. And if we think of in our industry, there's certain purposes where vendors have either expanded their offering or new entrants have come in. So an example could just be digital menu boards, hypothetically, right? They're elements that infuse artificial intelligence and they're different components of DMB that vendors are coming in with a unique value proposition. So if I had a placemat within our industry, it would be very domain focused as opposed to category specific, which is what we had earlier.
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah,
do,
Jay, I
Jay?
don't know if you, yeah, how do
well,
you
I
look at
think that's
that?
a great example. You know, we're using some AI tools today just to analyze the ads we run on the digital menu board and say, is it eye-catching? Do they see it? Is it working? Or do we need to change the ad? And we're doing that before we even do the A/B testing now because we had a lot of ads that were scoring low right off the bat. Why put them up and waste our time?
Mhm.
Okay, so if we're going to make this real, uh, we've put the first thing up there, which is skipping discipline prioritization. So when you say that people are doing it wrong, where does that like actually start?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. We spoke with someone in the restaurant space who had a very specific interest in creating a menu assistant on their mobile app. The idea that I want to engage with this, I want to be able to ask this app, what is gluten free, or I need something high in protein, right? That was something that was very obvious and closely mirrored ChatGPT use case, right? About asking a question, getting a response. So that was asked of us. What we quickly uncovered for several reasons is that idea did not really lend itself to any ROI. What did lend itself to ROI was fixing in-store operations and helping them understand what is the demand that I could expect from in on premises or 1P or 3P, because that's going to drive how much food I prep, when I prep it, how many people that I actually employ and staff. And so we pivoted them around that, was able to execute that use case successfully. And then as a beacon, we started the prioritization. And the prioritization includes bringing in this cross-disciplinary picture of your organization. So it could be your in-store, it could be finance, HR from a change management, food and beverage. We're bringing the folks in to get an enterprise view of what are those use cases that we believe would be helpful and essential to our organization. And then creating a framework to, again, drill down what's the stack rank. And after that, there's corporate agreement, and then you go. And then there's really
That's
a different.
I mean, that's fascinating because Jay, when I talk to organizations and have their conversation about that, you always talk about your IT strategy and roadmap, and you talk
Yep.
about prioritizing holistically, put everything down. Now, that was Adam just said that in a certain way, and what we're talking about here seems like you need to apply AI in these different areas, but you have to prioritize them, but they have to also be built into that tech stack and roadmap.
Yeah, and the questions I like to ask as we go through this, first, is it possible? Do the actually work to achieve the result?
Mhm.
Is it useful? And then is it profitable? And when you get all right, well, this is worth real money and is going to help improve the business, and this looks fun and might make guests not going to drive sales, and you can end up with projects that may produce a result but doesn't produce a profit or may just fail outright. And
Yeah,
you got to build that into that roadmap.
yeah, and what Jay, I mean, he really highlights it. If you think of it at a high level, this conversation would generate a bunch of ideas. And then once you have the ideas, then there's certain criteria, and Jay just listed four of them, that then will whittle those ideas into something that's more practical. and particularly based on whatever lever is most important to the organization, then all of a sudden they're going to start taking place in a stack ranking. And
Well,
then you go
if
ahead
you
and move
don't,
forward.
well, yeah. So you've got, how it's going to occur, but Jay also has an additional challenge in front of him that he has to herd the cats, so to speak here, that, there's a lot of different requests that are going to come in to his office from the different disciplines within, the restaurant operation itself. And so how are you in fact deciding, internally, operationally, what to pursue first? And both of you have experience in that. Adam, you're helping direct people and guiding them on that. But at the end of the day, Jay's got to guide his internal group on that.
Yeah. Well, I could say for us, we do a very formal analysis of the feasibility of the project and the likely outcome range of the project. How good can it be? How not good can it be? And we go through those in a leadership organization after that work is done and cherry pick out those top 3 or 4 to attack. And the other stuff sits on the shelf until it becomes the next thing.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. And in our WWT world, we utilize a value versus complexity model, right? Where do these use cases fall across those criteria? And ultimately, that will narrow the conversation again to that point of action.
And by the way, I thought your analogy that you used or the example you used at the very beginning of this, where you were talking about sometimes you're not focusing on the right thing when it comes to the ROI, just because people are asking the request, that does take some thinking to figure that out. But, there's something else here that I'm wondering about is, there's a lot of challenges in our operations today. And, when I think of a challenge in ourselves, right? I sit there and I do the chat GPT thing and I say, how do I do this? Or what are examples of ways to correct this? But it's not as simple as that. How do they choose the guest facing, challenges that they're going to do before they fix their foundational processes?
And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a bit. The underlying element of AI is to get your foundations right. And so your underlying foundations include things like architecture, but also ensuring that you have the right processes to absorb AI. And I think we'll touch that in a bit.
Okay, since we're going to touch it, be my guest and let's move forward to the next point.
All right, number 2. Mistaking identification for readiness, and this is very similar. So if you think of artificial intelligence, and you touched on it a bit, Rob, there's an element of, can we do this, right? Again, to my earlier chart, do we have the right data structure? Do we have the right people? Do we understand, to Jay's point, the funding model and how much money this is going to cost, not just from day 1, since it's usage oriented, day 3 or month 5, right?
Yeah.
There are elements to ensure, and right now organizations are taking a bit on too quickly, right? They're starting these use cases without an appreciation for the complexity and the distraction inherent in that endeavor.
Well, okay.
I'll just say
Yeah.
we put a chat bot on our website and we started it out on a single page and worked through the training and the results and quizzing it ourselves and reviewing a lot of the questions it was being asked before we made it site-wide. And I'm really happy with it today. You're happy to go out to chuckycheese.com and check it out. But the growth of the use of it has been very steadily increasing because it is useful and people are finding success there. And it's resulting in a few less calls in our call center as well.
Hey, but wait a second. Was there something that surprising came out of that you weren't expecting to come out of putting that up there in people's use that maybe changed the focus and the prioritization you were doing?
Well, there are responses to it for sure. We noticed this summer that people were asking our chatbot to compare our summer pass to other people's summer pass. And we thought, well, that's an interesting idea. Let's gather from their websites and just put them up there like Geico Insurance or Progressive Insurance and do that comparison. And we let it do it with no influence, just said, compare these and choose. And fortunately, we won most of those comparisons.
But it also probably provided data for you to see how those comparisons would come up, because just because you have a perception of how, it would have been interesting, by the way, to be in your conference room or something and say, okay, what do you guys think the answer would be? And then you go take a look at what the answers were, because maybe maybe customers' perceptions are different than what you thought you were, and you change the way you do business.
Well, the good news was we'd already done that research, because that's how we worked out how we were going to set our program up. But putting the research into the chatbot and making it available to the public was a step we had to really think through and say, is this the right thing to do? Is it fair? Is the analysis fair? And we want to be honest about it, right? It is what it is, but it turned out to be a great move for us. But it was a bunch of work, right? We had took work that was internal and decided to make it public facing and change the language to be normalized for the industry, and some of that stuff. So it was a work effort that was a surprise this summer.
Well, Adam, I'm sure you have a perspective, because you've seen it in many different organizations in several industries and things. Is there an example in there as well that you might use, or something that's a challenge in it?
Yeah, so if I think of the, again, exuberance with AI in 2025, I think a large part of that story was a coding assistant. So this idea that you can leverage AI to develop things faster. And as organizations are increasingly doubling down on their mobile app, increasingly we've had very many conversations with customers about bringing that into their operation. And you have to be very careful, again, because the idea of developing code faster is amazing. The reality is that code that you develop faster still needs to be tested and documented and interrogated before it goes to production. And so the question again is, and we're increasingly finding that organizations are still thinking through this last part, is the second half of your process ready to absorb all that? Or will that code sit? Or will the code, the relevancy decrease because it isn't as released as you wanted to initially? So again,
No,
a readiness component.
yeah, I think you're saying, though, that AI readiness is more than just having data. That's what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. You can break readiness into several components. Data is absolutely one of them. Infrastructure is another. And similar to the previous slide, process, right? Workflow associated with, let alone are your people capable of absorbing it to the level to match your thesis?
Yeah. I'll give the example. We last year we started a program to analyze our pricing at every store, because we felt like the pressure on consumers, we were working on value offers that met the consumer's demand to get a better deal. And we said, hey, let this pricing analysis tell us what consumers can afford, what we should be charging. And it priced every product differently in almost every store. Today we have 7 price tiers. It suggested we needed about 48 price tiers. And we're like, hey, I can't even code that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to diagnose early, whether somebody is ready or not, without moving ahead and then having to backtrack?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this one. So that's part of the initial bullet, right? Is this prioritization? So the part of the complexity is, what is the level of effort required to bring this idea to fruition? And so part of that includes a lot of the attributes that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we move to the next point, and let me just remind our attendees that if you do have a question, you can go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and we're going to leave a few minutes at the end, and we'll bring up some of those and have the discussion. So take it away.
Number 3, we say at Worldwide, you can deploy AI into a bad process, but then you'll just have a bad process with AI. So fundamentally, part of AI is interrogating your existing workflow to ensure that AI is introduced at the right point. And again, this is a level of nuance, and this is a level of introspection that is foreign to many organizations. And so we see a lot of rework, to Jay's earlier comment, potentially about drowning, right? A lot of rework being done because the process wasn't sufficiently validated and revised before AI was introduced.
Yeah, you can make a bad process go so fast people can't handle it.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Right. And then you're obviously not going to get the outcome that you had expected to get without thinking that through. So, when I think of AI and I think of workflows, I'm thinking about, the spreadsheet and laying it out, as you said, or putting a whiteboard on it. And what exactly are we talking about then? Workflow design.
Do you want to? Well, I'll just say I think that if you have a process that has manual steps where AI can help and improve that workflow, make that step faster, but it doesn't create a bottleneck in the next step. Those thinking ahead of those kinds of problems is part of what we're talking about. The other one is that bad data, bad workflow together. Adding AI just gets you worse results, right? That you can make that problem, you can exacerbate the problem rather than solve.
And that, by the way, is also a lesson learned in strictly depending upon AI to define it, you know, and provide the data. While it's good at finding the other, you know, outside resources and data that's available, at the end of the day, you do need to actually look at it and make sure it fits into your culture and your process.
Yep. And we work with customers previously about optimizing order sequencing. So you can imagine that an order comes in, again, on-prem, order comes in from 1P or 3P. How do you sequence that? And so what we learned is that typically stores have a clear the queue mentality, clear the tickets, as opposed to prioritizing one channel over another for various metrics. And so that process change is so important. And oftentimes that's the piece where, to your point earlier, Rob, the A/B test, let's deploy it, learn quickly, and then iterate. These are the little lessons learned that you employ as you move along the way.
Well, it is a challenge, isn't it? Because different people have different confidence levels about AI. A lot of people also have a fear level about AI. Instead of enhancing or helping them with their job or making it easier, maybe it's going to replace me there. So I sort of wonder about, you know, the process may need to change in order to use it, but also whether people accept and will use the data or the outcome that they're given.
Yeah,
and I suppose that's a conversation for both of you.
It's a great point. And again, having been here in 11 years, I think we're at this inflection point, and studies have also shown this. There's significant fear about the impact AI is going to have across whatever dimension you want to discuss. But research has also supported the closer you are to AI, the less you have that fear. And so the criticality of getting out of the gate early and getting out successfully is so important, not just from an ROI perspective, but it's directly to address the fear that's inherent in most people's experiences, certainly on a professional scale. So we have to move deliberately. We have to move with intentionality and velocity. But there's more at risk here than dollars or cents. There's a long tail if someone's first impression with AI produces a bad results. And this is the coaching that we're providing in our engagements.
You know, just there was a question that came in from the audience, and I think it is actually pertinent here about, you know, what question should an organization, you know, ask themselves about the ideal result before they take on these initiatives? Because, you know, you have to, as we talked about, you know, look at the workflows, which is what we're talking about here, and there's processes involved as well.
Yeah. Again, I go back to, and I'll reflect on the slide we talked about earlier. What are those kinds of considerations that are required for AI success? The first one is the data piece, right? And to be very clear, data messy means data is either inaccessible, it's inconsistent, requires manual cleansing to actually add value, right? Then there's the infrastructure piece, right? There's a readiness piece. There's a making sure that the systems are integrated, which we're going to talk on a little bit later. So this kind of self-diagnostic is very important. And you do that again, the spirit of number 3 is to decompose the processes for those use cases that you've identified.
Yeah, if you're using AI to get a result and somebody needs to manually type that into the next platform to take advantage of it, that integration part isn't obvious all the time, but it is really critical. Employee scheduling is a great example. I produce a schedule over here, but I can't get it into the schedule delivery system where the employee is going to see it. I'm not gaining ground. I've got an optimized schedule I can't use.
Boy, I love the fact that you brought that up, because so many people talk about labor as being one of the key, not labor reducing labor, but labor enhancing, and scheduling is one of the big items. Jay, if you don't mind just following on to that, you know, what is key if you're going to embed AI, let's say, into your day-to-day operation, into something like labor, which they all have to work with, and schedule?
Well, I think this is one where we're still on the cusp of making it great. There are some good labor scheduling tools out there, but I don't know any GM that doesn't say, hey, that was a great schedule, but I'm still changing Bob and Kathy because Bob needs to be doing this job and Kathy's way better at that job. And in spite of me telling it that, it's still not getting it right. I think it's an area where we've still got some work to do. But getting GMs comfortable that it can deliver them an initial schedule that's easy to adjust,
Exactly.
making sure the tools are there to get the schedule like they believe it needs to be so that they do use it. All those things are necessary to get that initial adoption. The better that schedule is, the more closely it resembles what they believe is getting results, the more they'll use it. But it's
of course, yeah, and that word results is sort of interesting too, because we reward people on results, whether it's a server, whether it's a cook, whether it's a manager, and if we set results-driven rewards in there that also tie to the use of AI, I would guess that the adoption and the walls come down because now they actually see it as something that is rewarding them.
Well, I'm always careful in that. Be careful what you're measuring because that's the behavior you're going to get. So I don't want them to use AI for the sake of AI. I want them to use the AI because they believe, or the AI tooling around a process because they believe it's giving them a better result more quickly, and that the ultimate outcome is better for the company, not just because it's AI.
No, I would certainly agree, and I thank you for clarifying that point. Nobody should do reporting just for the, any type of reporting for the just sake of doing it. But if you can show them the way by using this tool, it's going to equal that result. Then, that perhaps it comes out there. I don't know if there's a secret to that, Adam, that you've seen as well in that adoption and getting people to embrace it in day-to-day operations.
I will mention that we use champions for this. We use small groups, find somebody who's really become successful, and let them convey, operator to operator, I'm winning because I'm doing this.
You're evangelists.
Yeah, those evangelists are way more valuable than anybody from IT.
One of my managers historically would say, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. And so if you go back to Jay's point about he started his development in offer optimization step by step, right, and built success, and eventually it snowballed into a deployment. It's the same thing. So if you have a champion, they need to rally around not just a cause, but a proof point. And so as you have those proof points that come up in an organization, people start releasing and removing the guard. And that drives adoption.
You are both so right in this, because experience also says that if we were to go back like two of your bullet points, both of them, including those day-to-day operations people and how you're defining the workflows and prioritization as well, because the way they view the world and what's a priority to them and serving their guest at the end result, maybe one of those success things is actually including them in the process from the start.
Absolutely. And I alluded to that earlier. The customer that I referenced, the field operations perspective was included in the working group. It has to be. Otherwise, there's this chasm, right, between the corporate and what happens in the field, and that has to be bridged.
Okay. Well, what's our next point?
Point systems. So as you think of point systems, they solve many, many problems, but they also create some problems. And as long as organizations are aware of that and plan, not an issue. Again, what we're seeing is several critical functions that are generated from point systems they are creating a bit of confusion. And so taking a step back again, this goes back to the process piece, which feeds into the system piece. Taking a look at your enterprise architecture to understand where there's compatibility issues is a very big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is so first of all, as we're taking a look at the different systems, you're right. We are talking about fragmented systems and multiple truths out there. So, Jay, how does that show up when you're bringing all these different systems together?
That's a great question. When I came to Chuck E. Cheese, I felt like we had way too many vendors and point solutions that weren't really working together and getting us the results. And there's always a debate in IT and the business side, but this vendor makes the perfect scheduler. well, can we publish the schedule and get the employees to use it? No, but it doesn't really, that example I already used is an example of that. It's better to have a really well integrated system that does a very good job and work on optimizing that than to have all these point solutions that require manual interventions or other manual processes to be effective, because those tend to break down when people have to do the in-between part.
And by the way, sometimes the comparison point the point in there for the point solutions, which I very commonly would refer to as siloed solutions in there, is, you take a look at the best of breed versus all in one, which I think is the example that Adam gave and that you gave on individual best of breeds or a point solution in there. But when you have an all-in-one, they have to bring it together, and you may look at that architecture or how the systems work together in order to explain it to people that you're going to have a combination of both.
Yeah, I've never been anywhere where you didn't need a few of these point solutions because they're the only vendor delivering real value. And you've got to find a way to get that integration done so that it's not a problem point, as Adam was saying.
Yeah, and I think that point, the integration, right, this is a problem that can be solved. To be very, very clear, what we're seeing, customers are not addressing this earlier. So an example of recent conversation is a customer has multiple forecasting systems. Well, your marketing forecast tool is influencing your CMO, and then your demand forecasting tool is influencing your finance team. And then you have the labor forecast. So now all of a sudden, you have these different inputs to what should be one enterprise strategy. And again, this is a problem that we help our customers solve at WWT, but there needs to be acknowledgement as organizations are making those choices for point solution and best in breed is what is the next action, if any, to ensure that it applies to my enterprise architecture so we can maximize the value.
Well, that's a historical problem, by the way, because way back when, even in my days as a restaurant manager, you would have the marketing department coming up with combos and things like that might not be in the system. And then you go ahead and you got to go ahead and deliver on that. And so it almost seems like it's the same thing, but it's, hyper accelerated.
Yeah, but they're not going to advertise it until tomorrow. So I've got all day to get it in the platform.
That's right. That's right.
No, generally they were going to advertise it would show up on the point of sale or show up on a slippage board, and then you realize they did it and it was in your red book in the morning.
Yeah.
So there you go. But I mean, it just shows you the problems are the same, but there's just so many more different solutions to it that really makes, pulling it together as well. So maybe we can just go ahead and move on to the next piece, because I think, there's a number of things to tie in to all of these points.
Sure. The last piece is about, I go back
There's
to
your portfolio.
AI isn't one thing, right? Exactly. And so I'll give you an example to bring this home. We have worked with a customer in the retail space that really wanted to improve their personalization engine. And as you would expect, they had challenges with data. And so as we dug into the data for one particular SKU, there could be 15 iterations of that particular SKU. Now, historically, that would be a big challenge. Now, you can leverage generative AI to consolidate and group like-minded SKU categories and feed that into a machine learning model to then generate a high-fidelity forecast. This is one quick example that's super relevant, but now we're layering on different AI architectures to solve a problem. And this is not the future. This is what's happening right now. But unfortunately, the complexity of that is scaring off some customers in the market, the field, right? They're just still getting on this AI train. Don't try to add some complexity by introducing additional architectures simultaneously. But this is a solution to problems that we see across the market.
That's interesting, though, that as we think about it as a portfolio, I go above the blue line on this slide, and I look at each of these pieces, and I focus on the last one, which is robotics in there. And I think, when we talk about connected kitchens, we talk about, complete system eco-structure within the four walls. People underestimate the amount of data that comes out of robotics that actually goes into the rest of operations, production, service, and the menu.
Correct.
And things. And each one of those, have different pieces to do. It is a portfolio, but it's a wider portfolio than we probably look at.
Exactly right. Yeah, their second level this is part of the systems thinking framework that is required for artificial intelligence, what's that second domino and third domino that I need to be aware of as I make the decision?
So how does that fit into your portfolio, Jay? How do you look at this? Because it is, and pizza, by the way, that industry itself, had to create a lot of their own systems because they were leading the way and was very specialized in this. So how do you fit this in the overall portfolio of everything?
Boy, that's a big question. I would tell you that we are using 9 or 10 different AI engines. We're doing work in the graphics development area. We have voice and voice ordering up and running today. We're using it in various areas, but each individual implementation went through that review process and said, does it fit? Can we integrate? Is the cost model right? All of that. And as we're having success with it in one place, we're saying, can I reuse my success in another use case within the business to keep growing it and making it part of that overall architecture? Again, trying to keep the number of actual vendors as low as possible, but recognizing AI is not one thing. You've got to use the right AI tools from the right AI vendor to get real results.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you just said using the same use case. It's actually also the same process and workflow. You're just applying it to another area of your operation, but that ensures consistency in how you approach and deploy.
Yeah. And you're using a product that you're beginning to understand, right? And I think even a year into some of these, we're still understanding them. I don't think we have them wrangled. And at the velocity they're changing and improving, it's hard to even keep up with that.
Yeah, Adam, I think you may have a perspective on that as well because of the different models and the different pieces and how they integrate and work together more than just the ones that are even, on this slide.
Yeah, I was going to comment on Jay's point about reusability. And so what we're seeing now, the prompts that are used to generate a certain outcome are proving successful, which is fantastic. Organizations are now creating libraries of those prompts so that others can use them, right? These are prompts that not only have yielded success, they are now establishing a pattern within the organization that the organization wants to standardize or rally around. And so this idea of reusability and citizen development, right, is taking steam. And what that does is exponentially, now your output isn't limited to just a handful of IT people, right? Now you have other folks that are contributing to your processes for their benefit. And it's just a snowball that continues to happen. So reusability is a very big key in the overall efficiency that we're seeing in AI right now.
Jay, do you want to add to that or further comment on it?
Well, I'll say that is exactly where we're on the cusp of right now. We have a number of business people in finance and accounting, marketing, other areas that are becoming experts at these prompt developments using tools to collect those prompts and share them within their teams. And now we're saying, let's start sharing these more broadly in the organization so that people don't have to reinvent that wheel. You've built a really great one, and let's take advantage of that and share the knowledge and the ability to use these tools.
Well, I think so. We've had a number of questions that actually have come from the audience. We've covered a lot of the bullet points, but I do see one that I think would make a great wrap-up conversation point here, which really has to do with outcome. Because you really started with this of defining, prioritizing, looking at the investment. Cost did come up in there, and there's cost to deploy, there's cost to put it in there, et cetera. But, and by the way, Adam, we keep talking about the model as it's evolved through 2025, but we're within a couple months now of 2026. So what do we think from both of your perspectives? And I'll broaden a little bit. I'll include retail and hospitality in there as well. What do you think the AI outcomes of 2026 are going to be the most important to our industry going forward?
Yeah, I can start. I don't think anything has changed in 11 years. It's the broad bucket of return on investment. So whatever use case you decide to employ, what is the return on that use case? I think increasingly as we move forward in 2026, the opportunity for efficiency savings. So things that will not make the headlines. It may not be the fanciest app or the most creative avatar, but the operational processes that allow you to order faster, more precisely, to reduce the waste, even to control some of the conditions within your store. That should be the focus going forward. And based on the conversations we're having that really center around practicality of AI, those are the conversations that give me comfort that that's the direction we're headed in 2026 as an industry.
I'll go out on a limb and say I think we're going to see some customer-focused agentic AI helping you schedule your hotel room and get your amenities right, or what. You're going to start to see where we're doing that internally today and getting comfortable that it works and is reliable. You'll see that come out as customer-facing opportunities where we're going to let the AI do that work instead of a phone operator in a call center in, whether it's Kansas or Latin America doing that work. I think we're going to do some of that.
I'm so glad you brought that up, by the way. And you pointed to hospitality and making reservations or doing service in a hotel, because the point there being that the conversations I seem to have with people when they talk about this, especially with voice and customer facing, like in a drive-through or a kiosk or something like that, sometimes the realization is that other industries, when people get comfortable using it somewhere else to place the orders, do their banking and things, makes it successful for us.
Absolutely. And I would, you have to go to the bank, but you can choose another restaurant if the restaurant isn't giving you the service you want, right? That we have to do it. We have to be really reliable when we deliver this to our customers if we're going to do it. And that's why the tests start so small and grow and are carefully delivered.
Right. And so, Adam, that does tie it together, by the way, for you, because you did talk about the ROI, at the bottom line, but there's two types of ROI. There's the value to the guest, and then there's the cost to the operator to provide that value. And somewhere in the mix probably comes, increased profitability, better efficiency, and hopefully, more sales.
That's exactly where I was going to go. These are related outcomes. So if we think of 2025 and 2026, just think of the recent earnings for various in the fast casual space. It's been a very soft market. And so you ask yourself, what's going to change in the next quarter or two? Probably not that much. And so again, organizations that we're talking to want to root out inefficiencies in order to keep a certain price point, or better yet, to create additional value opportunities to meet the price sensitivity. So this is very much a robbing Peter to subsidize Paul type of game, but you can't remove yourself from the environment with which these organizations are serving their customers.
Well, I think that you both have left us, with some really good thoughts on how to tie this together. And I hope that our audience is burning into their brains this screen that's right here, because I think it does give the main topics, the main steps, but also on the top piece where they may apply the AI as well. And hopefully the outcome and ROI for attending this webinar itself is going to be, not getting AI wrong, which is, how we started this. So I want to thank both of you for joining us worldwide, and Adam and Chuck E. Cheese Entertainment and Jay, for sharing the perspective of how to put it together. And you both have, a world of knowledge here, to share, and I'm sure our audience appreciated that. And I would remind everyone that this will be available afterwards online. And there are questions. You had a lot of questions. There are some questions we didn't get to, so we will go ahead and try to address those and put those online as well. And we thank you for joining us today. And Adam and Jay, thank you so much for being a part of actually teeing up this conversation, serving up the conversation for us. And Jay, you delivering it.
Thanks,
well
guys.
Played. Well played.
Appreciate it.